This is part two of our interview with Ian Paterson, CEO of Plurilock Security. Plurilock is a cybersecurity company providing endpoint biometric authentication technologies. On the Aurora story, they've got substantial revenues, but there wasn't low profit margin. Are they largely do they provide services, or are they a reseller that has kind of lower margins? Like the strategy seems very clear, like you need a distribution network to get out there. So what is their current makeup of what they do? And if they're a reseller, what other types of security stuff do they resell or implement in that?
Yeah, so I would characterize Aurora just in a broad terms as a solutions provider, and so that includes both hardware, software, and services. And so the types of customers that they sell to are, again, U.S. federal government, state, local, and commercial. Now, within those, there's absolutely a mix where they might sell some servers to a customer, they might sell some email security products, and then they also might sell some services, all potentially to the same customer or different customers. But the value of providing that breadth of offering is that they end up developing a great relationship with that customer, and the intent is to become the trusted advisor when it comes to cybersecurity to that end customer. So that has been their goal. Now, historically, Aurora has done a lot of lower margin resell. So you're absolutely correct there in terms of their profitability. The thing that's was maybe not as clear if you look at the financials, which are up on CR, is that they had been investing in their professional services arm. So they'd actually been investing early to scale up their professional services engineers. The reason for that is they were taking the strategy of landing an initial client. Maybe they land with kind of a lower margin hardware or software sale. Their intent was then to upsell that to a higher margin service offering. And that was the core business on their own. The value to them with Plurilock is that now they have this third option, which is kind of lower margin, medium margin, we'll say, services, and then higher margin owned software products. And so it was really in line and keeping with their goal of pushing those customer relationships through the value journey, where they're able to increase profitability as time goes on. So the Plurilock element here is that on average our software products have a approximately 80% plus gross margin, right? We're selling software. And so that was very attractive to them to then be able to offer back to their customers. Because they've been investing historically in these engineers early, the profitability was lower than it would be if those engineers were fully utilized. And so that's certainly some areas of opportunity for us going forward.
All right. And like you mentioned, I don't know how many, after $1 trillion, it doesn't really matter. It's a big darn market. And the damages are huge. But at the same time, like the cybersecurity breaches happen, some are at like sort of spoofing me to get in, and other times it's beyond the user's control. There is a backdoor or some 0-day fault in the system and so forth. What portion of security breaches are done through bad password management, I guess? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think when you look at cybersecurity overall, there are vulnerabilities all over the place. So, I mean, I typically say that cybersecurity is a team sport where you really need to work well with other vendors in order to provide a total solution to the end customer. There's no one product or service that you can buy to stay safe from everything. So what that means in practice is that if you're a mid-sized bank, or if you're kind of an enterprise that has sensitive data or sensitive systems that you need to protect, you really need to be cognizant of network security, data security, certainly protect your identities. And then you not only need those solutions, those point solutions, but you also need to accept that if one of those fails, you need a defense in-depth strategy to be able to catch it. So the part that Plurilock plays is twofold. The first is if somebody's trying to gain access to your account, we can protect against that, because even if, let's say, your password is stolen, if you type in the password, you're going to type it in differently than a bad guy would, and so we could potentially keep them out of your account. That's the first part. The second part is if that attacker does get access to your account for some reason, we would be able to identify and then alert or potentially lock out that attacker after they've gained access and are moving around the system. Now, if you look at a typical attack or an example of a typical attack, what you're often going to see is that there's different stages. So an attacker is first going to conduct some reconnaissance. They're going to look to see where are the vulnerabilities. They're then going to attempt to gain a foothold in the system. Once they have that foothold, they'll escalate privileges, or they might start moving laterally within the network. They're going to look for what assets are available, what data can they steal, what systems can they access, and then they'll start exfiltrating that data out. So if you look at that kill chain, there's multiple points at which you can stop them. You can stop them from being able to do reconnaissance, period, if you just have a very opaque network. If you can protect them against them gaining a foothold, obviously you keep them out of the system. If those two things fail, now that they're in the system, how can you prevent them from moving laterally? And so Plurilock really fits kind of in the second and the third step, where we're going to try and keep them out. We're going to help try to keep them out. We're also going to help try and identify if they're already in. If they say grab your credentials and they start logging in as you, we want to prevent them from being able to move laterally through the network, and certainly before they're starting to exfiltrate data. You can look at a recent example. There was a Florida water treatment facility. This is about a couple weeks ago now. And it was kind of a scary incident because the operator inside the water treatment facility was actually at the plant, and they had the ability to remotely access the systems. So, if a supervisor was from home, they needed to change a dial or something, they could remotely log in and control the system. Well, what happened was there was somebody who remotely connected into the system, started changing a dial, and the operator realized that they increased the level of lie from 100 parts per million to over 11,000 parts per million, which was a dangerous level. And so thankfully they saw this in real time and they were able to stop it. And so that's really where we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid people having access, bad guys having access to systems to be able to do that. Either at the point where they're logging in or after they've logged in, what are they actually doing, and can we recognize that behavior as bad? So hopefully that gives some context into kind of the cyber ecosystem and how the blue team or the defenders think about being able to prevent attacks.
So yeah, I guess even if people get in a different manner, even not by hack, if their typing algorithm or cadence is different, you could still identify them. So it's not just keeping them out. It's once they're in, you could maybe hopefully identify them and boot them out before any bad stuff happens.
That's correct. I think also the big shift in thinking is that the identity and access management market, which is the subset that the Plurilock products play in of the larger cybersecurity market, has always been focused on keeping people out. But there hasn't been as much authentication capability after you've done that initial sign-on. Once you're in, then how do you continuously check beyond that? And that's really the game changer that we're trying to educate the market with at Plurilock is, yeah, you can have that point that's very secure, but after you're in, then what happens? I mean, just think of in person, how many times have you gone to Starbucks and seen somebody's laptop just open and exposed, just working away? Or how many times have you been in an office environment where somebody gets up and walks away from their computer? Yeah, they're supposed to lock their computer when they walk away, right? But they don't always do that. Well, magnify that now with the work from home setting, because now you have as a business, you have no idea who's in that physical location. And so do you really know that it's Ian who's on that device? There's not as much good certainty. And certainly there's not as many controls as if you were still in the office.
Yeah, I was going to say the COVID and work from home must be an absolute nightmare for security professionals. It's like, oh God, there's one more thing we have to not leaving my desk, but I leave my basement or whatever, and then someone walks in, my kid or like anyone even. Yeah, so that would be a big thing, I imagine. With COVID, have you found the sales cycle easier or more challenging just because of all the remote stuff? Or tell us how is life for Plurilock in COVID with dealing customers and so forth?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one thing that we saw quite a lot of is when COVID first hit, there was definitely a pause. Everybody was looking to see, well, what's going to happen. One of the interesting things that occurred that not many people realize is that When you're going into the office and you have 100 people in the office, when you're working from the office, you're going to have, typically you're going to have a corporate firewall. And one of the functions of that firewall is visibility. So you actually know how many people are pushing packets back and forth, how many people are connecting to the network, how many inbound attempts are we getting. Well, when you have your workforce suddenly working from home, you lose a lot of that visibility. So from a security standpoint, when COVID hit and everybody started working from home, a lot of that visibility that they historically have relied upon at the network level was absent. And so there was definitely a repositioning of technology to be able to address some of those blind spots. I think the other big thing that occurred is going back to that, the typical office environment. And I should point out that Plurilock is very focused on B2B. We're a solution for workforce authentication. We're not focused on consumers. And so what happens is, you go into an office building, you have a guard at the lobby, you have a pass card that gets you through a turnstile or maybe lets you up the elevator. And then once you get to your floor, you maybe have a physical key to get into your office, and then there is your desktop or laptop. Well, from a work from home setting, you've lost the security guard, you've lost the pass cards, you've lost the keys. And so a lot of those controls, physical controls, are now absent. And so it's causing security teams, both IT, information security teams, as well as just physical security teams, to kind of rethink, well, what is the new normal going to look like if we have these people working from home? We don't have those controls. Maybe some people do go back, and so how do we compensate? So broadly speaking, I would say just in the market, there was a lot of, or there has been quite a lot of rethinking in terms of both medium and longer term strategies about what does the new normal look like? How do we support work in a way that is still secure, but also meets both our regulatory and security needs. We're excited because Plurilock can certainly play a role in that with the type of visibility and continuous authentication capabilities that we've talked about.
All right. On the ongoing, or even with the login protection, if I'm sitting at my desk and I'm eating a sandwich with one hand and typing away with the other hand, after like 10, 15 seconds of that, am I going to get booted out of the system? Or how do you manage those? I'm hungover or whatever one day, or I broke a finger and I got to type differently because my hockey game.
Yeah, I think, Martin, that's usually the point where I make a joke. If you're always hungover, then that's just part of your normal behavior. This is really only a problem if it happens once in a while. But in all seriousness, the system itself is quite configurable. So you gave an example. What happens if there's something suspicious happens? Do we lock out the user? Yeah, that is possible. You could set up and configure the system to work that way. Generally, though, the way that we're recommending to our customers and where we're seeing a lot of interest is to be able to configure the system in such a way that we're going to get visibility and get awareness that, hey, there's something wrong with the way that Martin is interacting with the device. That might be cause for concern. Now, generally, if we only have one or two alerts, it could just be that you're eating a sandwich, maybe the phone rang and you're talking and you're typing with one hand. That's not too concerning. The part where it becomes really concerning is if that suspicious behavior persists for minutes at a time or potentially hours at a time. So in a typical medium to larger enterprise, you're going to have what's called a SOC, a Security Operations Center, and they're going to be consuming data and logs from all manner of systems, including the firewall that we talked about, as well as potentially other endpoint technologies. And so they're looking at all these alerts and they're triaging those alerts to say, which ones are really suspicious, which ones do we really need to focus on. So in Plurilock's case, if we see a trend of suspicious behavior from Martin's computer, it's persisted over a couple of minutes, that might raise to the top of the list and there might be an analyst that starts investigating that. Now, that investigation may simply be a fairly quick check, but if that's, if that investigation also says, Martin's out of the country right now and he's acting suspiciously, and he's also accessing our financial database, well, then that becomes a really big problem. So the important part of any technology, but including Plurilock's, is how can we how can we integrate into the existing processes that the enterprise has? And so if we can help shorten the time that that analyst is able to resolve those alerts, that can have a lot of value. Similarly, so that I've just given you a security use case. Similarly, on the end user's perspective, the benefit to the end user might be because Plurilock already has really good signals to indicate that Martin is in fact Martin. Maybe we don't need to prompt Martin as frequently when he's going to log into some other system, right? So it's pretty typical, certainly in my day-to-day, where I have to log into multiple systems, and if I access this HR database or this financial database, it's going to prompt me again. Well, because Plurilock already has confidence that Martin is Martin or that Ian is Ian, when you go to access that other system, we provide the ability to check against us using an API call, and then potentially allow you to skip having to log in again. So again, it's very configurable. The point is, we're trying to answer the question, are you the right person? And then from that, integrate that into the existing processes of the enterprise to either reduce risk, provide more value to the end user, or both.
All right. I wrote down a whole bunch of questions, so these may sort of jump around a bit. Well, and this kind of, I guess, goes into a question I have here. This is a B2B kind of solution as opposed to a B2C sales model.
Correct.
I couldn't just say, hey, I'll give you $10 a month and you monitor all my different logins from home and so forth, right?
Correct. Yeah, we're focused on workforce authentication.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm trying to think of other opportunities for you. Like, I would think one of the channels you could be working on is something like an OEM or white label basis where, I don't know, RSA or IBM incorporates your login authentication technology into one of their own security things. And it's just like, hey, these are one more level that we integrate with the service we're selling. I'm guessing that's a strategy you're pursuing at this point. And if so, how is that side going? Or is that a little more few steps down the road?
It's a great point. I mean, I think broadly speaking, there's certainly some parallels where other technology vendors have taken where they just integrate on an OEM basis or a white label basis or similar their technology for use with other parties. I mean, that's certainly an opportunity that Plurilock could pursue. I think right now where we're focusing a little bit more of our time is just going directly to those end customers, because for us it's very important that we have both the use cases, how they want to use the product, but also the references, the testimonials, etc., to be able to say, yes, this is how we want to use it, and here's 10 customers, that all kind of look and feel the same. I think that an OEM strategy is I mean, it's always possible. So far, we haven't focused on that on a proactive basis. I think we're receptive to those conversations if and when they come in, but right now we're much more focused on going to those end customers either with resellers or through Aurora or something similar, or just direct ourselves, and making sure that they are successful.
So many services are sort of web-based provided. Could you sell or get your system configured so when I don't know, logging into my Spotify or my Google account or whatever, that on a web service that you can sort of identify that, and that's like an indirect to consumer service where you sell it to a B2C company and they use it to help their client security?
I mean, look, I think technically it's certainly possible. If we step back, ultimately the thing that Plurilock has that is unique to us, and certainly where we have a lot of core competencies around, is being able to recognize that you are the right person on the device. And to your point, there are a ton of opportunities where we can deploy that on more of a consumer model, or the workforce model, or in a web account on a desktop. Like that's the great thing about this technology, is that there are a lot of places that you can take it. One thing that I would just point out, and this comes more from my experience just in the last 10 years working around data and answering business questions with data, is that anytime you have a machine learning or an AI model that you need to train, the the model becomes better and more accurate with the more training that you do, up until a point, and then there's diminishing returns and so on. But generally speaking, if you can train a model with a couple of hours worth of data, you're more likely to get a more accurate reading from that model than if it was a shorter period of time. So there's a famous saying in Silicon Valley that whoever has the most data wins. And this is because of this idea where the more data you have, the more training you can do, and therefore the better the accuracy or the performance of the models. So if you translate that and you compare that against the various opportunities that we have available to us, so whether we do something on a B2C basis, whether we integrate with a web application, et cetera, just on a pure data machine learning dimension, we're always going to see better performance when you have more data. And therefore, so you can translate that into where are the opportunities where you have a longer period of time with the same user as opposed to a shorter period of time with more users. Both are valuable, but they're kind of doing two different things. And so I think that's really why you see Plurilock focusing more on those use cases where we have the same person, they're consistent over time. Maybe they have different devices that they're working on, but it's going to be Ian that we see for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 365 days a year, as opposed to 100,000 people who are only going to log in for 5 minutes and then log out again in a web service. So that's just more of from a data standpoint. Obviously, there's exceptions to that, of course, but we really believe that because of this technology, how it works, et cetera, we're always going to do better in those workforce use cases. Now, the one exception that I would say is there are certainly opportunities where those lines blend, or those lines blur, I should say. And so, contractors is a great example. So in a lot of cases, you'll have a mid-market or enterprise organization, and they use contractors a lot for IT work or something like that. And so you end up having these people who aren't quite employees. They have a high degree of access to the systems, and they persist for a long period of time, but they kind of behave a little bit more like third parties coming into the system than the true employees. So there is definitely some blurring of lines at that point. And that's where it becomes really interesting and kind of, it's a fun challenge about how do you secure those people as well. So anyway, I hope that gives some context to the technology and kind of where it fits really well.
All right, that makes sense. And going on to like the core technology, you said there have been, I forget how many, but lots of research papers written on this. You've developed it for a while. Could you talk about, did it come from like an academic environment and then you licensed it out? How did you get sort of access to this IP? And then in terms of your spend right now, are you primarily focused on biz dev, or are you still putting a lot of money into R&D to expand the core technology? And are you maybe pursuing, and what can you say about maybe new types of presumably authentication solutions that you're going towards? Maybe talk a little about what you can about your roadmap.
Yeah, for sure. So you are correct. I mean, the technology did originate in a university. And so the reason why Victoria is where Plurilock is because there was a nucleus of research going on at the University of Victoria. And so one of our co-founders and still very active advisor was researching behavioral biometrics. So that's the field of study that this all originates from. And so from that nucleus of research, there was also some PhD students and some postdocs. And so Plurilock, the entity, really spun out of the university, acquired 100% of all of the IP. It wasn't a licensing; it was very much the acquisition. And so that was the kind of the genesis of the Plurilock corporate entity, is that we had the intellectual property. We had some great data scientists. We had some patents at that point as well. And so that was the genesis for this technology. And then since then, you have to build a product around it, you have to build a team, et cetera, and then kind of carry it forward. But I think what you're alluding to is that we were the beneficiaries of a lot of very rigorous research that had been done in an academic setting with the sorts of pressures and standards that come with that. And so that was very helpful. So that was your first question. In terms of your second question around, where are we focusing our time? Largely, it's time to ramp up sales and marketing. And so, in terms of a growth standpoint, where we're focusing our time is spending more time with customers, a little less time working on the AI and the ML, artificial intelligence and machine learning. And we're now taking that into customers. Having said that, we are continuing to invest in R&D. And so some examples that have come from that, we have announced, I think, 3 at this point, provisional patents over the last 4 months or so, 4 or 5 months. And so that is a reflection of continued investment in R&D. The other milestone or catalyst that we talked about for 2021 was those platform integrations. And so again, that would be the sort of thing where it's a product-led strategy where we want to integrate the product into other ecosystems to help accelerate sales and increase the value to customers. And so again, that would also be investment. So there is a split between research, which is kind of where those patents end up getting developed, and then development, which is putting the code together to actually make the product usable, useful to as many customers as possible. So that is continuing, and I'm certainly, I think one of the strengths of Plurilock is the technology, but also the technical team behind that technology, because that really is what sets us apart.
And I guess those people are heavily involved in the sales cycle. So the security buyers at the end know that you guys know your stuff, and you give them that level of confidence they're looking for.
Sure. I mean, I think it's important on a number of fronts, right? I mean, I think if you look at the Aurora transaction, right, part of the reason why they were willing to do a deal with us and not anybody else was they saw value in the intellectual property that we had created and intend to continue to create. And so, I think that's very useful on a number of fronts, from an M&A standpoint, from a partnership standpoint, from a sales standpoint. It really helps define what Plurilock is.
All right, you've had a couple of news releases from the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, about I believe it's the Department of Homeland Security. You've gone through phase 1 and phase 2. I'm guessing they're fairly secretive. What can you tell us about that relationship and how that's evolving?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. I think one of the challenges with cybersecurity is that customers often don't want to be named. So it can be difficult at times to say, well, who are you actually working with? I mean, the great thing is with federal and kind of government customers in general is that a lot of those procurement records are public. So you can actually, it's all part of the public record about who spends money with whom. So specifically with Department of Homeland Security, we've been working with their so it's the DHS Science and Technology Division, SVIP, or Silicon Valley Innovation Program. So it's kind of a long acronym, DHS, SNT, SVIP. And they had put out a call specifically around identifying non-person entities, or what's occasionally referred to as IoT, Internet of Things devices. And so we had submitted some proposals to them around kind of some unique ways of solving the challenges that they had posted, and largely that was derived from our capabilities and being able to address who people are based on their behavior. And so the hypothesis was that we put forward was, could we leverage similar techniques and capabilities that are proprietary to us as a company to be able to solve some of their problems as well. And so we've been awarded 3 contracts so far. So it's a great example of I think Plurilock's capability, and so they've been a terrific partner to work with. So sorry, Martin, I just see there's a couple of questions in the chat. I just want to make sure we are able to address those.
Yeah, I talked to the B2B one, and there's another more sort of philosophical one about criminals winning and right. That, which it's a constant battle. They up their game, we up our game, and we keep duking it out, I guess. Are they deploying it, or is it more in an R&D thing? They're maybe a bit of a beta trial, so to speak, where they're just seeing how it works, or is it sort of a staged rollout, what they're doing in whatever mysterious departments they are working in?
Yeah, I mean, I want to be a little bit careful and not speak on behalf of DHS and what they may or may not be doing. But what I would say is that Plurilock has been focused on a capability that they had publicly posted about. And in terms of specific deployments or rollouts, I just refer people back to the press release on what we've been able to say.
All right, all right. How hard is it for an organization to deploy your technology? Is it like 1 week and they sort of put a couple of APIs or whatever in and they're up and at 'em, or is this a protracted, expensive as well? Whenever you muck around with your back-end system, that in itself creates new risk because maybe there's some issues with your software and so forth. How hard is that deployment?
Yeah, it really depends on two things. What is it we're deploying to, and then second, what are the capabilities that the organization has? So in theory, if you wanted to just roll out our Defend product to 1 computer or 10 computers or 100 computers, in theory, there shouldn't be any additional work for that second to 100th computer. But that depends a little bit on, are all the computers the same? What kind of existing IT policies are already in place? So unfortunately, the short answer is it depends. If it's a fairly standard environment, then yeah, I mean, you could roll it out in an afternoon, and we provide a cloud option so that the end customer doesn't need to set up anything on the server side. We just turn it on and kind of away you go. I think the challenge that cybersecurity just as an industry is running into is that there are very few, there aren't as many qualified cybersecurity engineers to fill all of the cybersecurity jobs that are out there. So I believe the statistic last year was there was 1 million jobs unfilled in cybersecurity. I believe I saw something around 3.5 million jobs is the estimate that will be unfilled in 2021, or potentially on a go-forward basis. Don't quote me exactly on those, but it's a large number. And so I think what organizations are challenged with is all of the initiatives that they want to pursue. Which ones can they actually execute on? Because there's only so many people that they have and so many hours in the day. Now, what we're trying to do at Plurilock is two things. One, we want to make it as easy as possible for those customers to be able to both procure and then leverage the solution. And so again, going back to those 2 platform integrations that we listed, that's part of what we can do just on a product basis. If you're already a user of one product, is there effectively like an app store where you could plug in and get Plurilock more easily? With 3 clicks instead of an hour's worth of work. So that's the first thing. The second thing is for those organizations that are just inherently more complex, not because of Plurilock, but just it's a complex organization. There's already a lot of software that's being deployed, etc. And you do need some hands-on keyboard to be able to affect a deployment. Well, in that case, part of the benefit of the Aurora transaction was they also had those professional services engineers. And so being able to offer a service option to help the customer actually get things deployed and set up and running and configured and integrated, that becomes both a value add that we can offer to those customers, as well as being able to increase potentially increase the average order volume by including an additional line item to drive revenue as well.
All right. And what is the main metric that investors should be looking at with Plurilock? Is it like how many users under management, basically, and which I would guess correlates kind of highly with revenue? And then, sorry, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, now that you've got Aurora in there, they're going to have, you're going to have big revenues going forward. Your revenue growth is going to be big. Like how to sort of differentiate the core Plurilock technology versus the rest of the sort of services and reselling you guys do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that gross margin is probably going to be the best metric to start with, and the reason for that is, Plurilock last 2 years has been around between 80 and 90% gross margin, which is fairly typical, I think, for software. I certainly expect that gross margin is going to decrease once we add in the Aurora financials, just because of that business model. And so the success of the cross-selling through the Aurora customer base, as well as the existing organic sales that we're targeting, will be reflected in an increase of gross margin relative to the other components of the business. Now, keep in mind, our integration plan with Aurora is a 12 to 24 month time horizon. So, Aurora is a great business. They've been running it well. We don't want to impact them negatively, and so we're going to make sure that what we're doing is creating value for shareholders, certainly, and also creating value for the Aurora customers. But I think that, to your question, I would be looking most at gross margin over time and watching that trend. That's going to be the indicator that both, I think, investors should be looking at, and certainly what we're going to be looking at as well.
Are the sales and biz dev team at Plurilock, are they all moving into the Aurora channel, or are they kind of work parallel, help each other out, maybe pass leads or technical support to one another? Still, they'll be kind of distinct?
Yeah, they'll be operating as independent entities. I mean, certainly there's leads that are passed back and forth, but we don't expect the Plurilock folks to be taking on any of the Aurora product line, we'll say.
Okay, all right. And what should the next 6 to 9 months, let's say through the end of this year, what sort of news flow should we expect? I guess some contract wins, and I don't know, new products or version 2.0 of stuff like that. Yeah, what kind of news flow generally? Not trying to be cute about what you're going to announce, but just what types of things? Maybe more M&A? Is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we're in a very exciting spot. I think any of the things that you just mentioned are within the realm of possibility. I think also it'll be interesting to see what happens just from a macro standpoint as the vaccines get rolled out and people start going back to work. It'll be interesting to see how that shifts the workloads, right? I mean, we're remote right now. Everybody's working remote. How is that going to change over the next little while? And then how is that going to trickle down to buying decisions, whether it be software or services or hardware? And so I think ultimately, last year, our goal for Plurilock was to get listed, to raise some capital, and to establish the right foundations for success for the next 3 to 5 years. And so I'm pleased with what we were able to accomplish last year. I think that we are in a good spot now. We have got listed. We completed the financing in February. We've completed one acquisition. And so I think what we're seeing as a result of those things is that we're being taken much more seriously now. Certainly, whenever you do the first acquisition, you end up getting more leads because people see that you're actually doing deals, and so that's when the leads come into you. And so I think that we're just really excited about the rest of 2021, and then even looking beyond that as well.
All right. And we're getting up to an hour here. We should start winding it up. Are there any points that didn't bring up that you'd like to highlight before we wrap things up here?
Well, I think so. Actually, just going back to the question that was asked in chat. I mean, so the question was, how does a security firm stay ahead of cybercrime? Seems like cyber crimes or cyber criminals are winning right now. I think one of the interesting observations that folks not in the industry may not be aware of is that in comparison to 10 or 20 years ago, there's much more financial incentive today for cyber criminals to actually be a business. So what I mean by that is, 10 or 20 years ago, there was always identity theft, but it wasn't being done at a scale or with the same economic incentives as I think that there is today. So as an example, there's a very liquid market for stolen data and different types of data, right? You hear sometimes about healthcare records being valued at a certain price versus passwords, which are valued at a different price. Credit card numbers are valued at yet another price. And so there are different buyers for these different types of data. But what that actually means is there's financial incentive and there's a return on investment for cyber criminals to go do crime and to create a value or a supply chain of, some people do the hacking, some people do the data theft, some people do the brokering or selling of that data. And then in some cases, you have groups that are vertically integrated and do all of it, right? And so the big change is how organized and how liquid that side has become. And so I think what we're seeing as a result is because there is kind of a return on investment, if I do some cybercrime, maybe I get more money to do more cybercrime. That's leading to what appears to be sort of an influx or more hacks that are occurring. So I just wanted to call that out because I think it's an important driver to the industry that people may not be aware of because it's a little bit under the surface in comparison to just what you read in the newspapers, which is about data breaches and hacks and that type of thing.
All right. Well, with that, thank you very much, Ian, for joining us today and telling the story. A lot of neat stuff going on there and very informative. Thanks a lot. Talk to you again soon.